Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and this is the 3-Month Vacation. I remember one of the early events in my speaking career. My wife, Renuka, was sitting in the audience, and when I finished my speech, I came back to my seat and asked her how she found the speech. "I gave you a -2, she said. Speaking hasn't been easy for me, and I struggle a lot not knowing what to say when in front of an audience. Luckily, almost at the start of my career, I ran into Eugene Moreau and his 13-box speaking system. The 13-box system was so honed, it was like having a samurai sword at your disposal. Except, it's not much use having a samurai sword and not going through sword practice. To get my speaking to a high degree of professionalism, I'd speak everywhere I could. And when I mean speak everywhere, these weren't fancy schmancy events. I'd speak at the Rotary Club, places where people would meet to network, and even at association meetings. In my mind, it was pretty clear that if I didn't get the practice, I wouldn't become a confident speaker. And I knew I'd reached a good level when I was paid to speak at an event. It wasn't much, it was about $300 or $400, but hey, it was a paid gig. The only problem was that my so-called ability had gone to my head. In the first few years, I'd rehearse 15, 16 times before getting in front of an audience. This audience happened to be farmers and not professionals. They still had to sell their products, so they still needed a message like the one that's contained in the brain audit. But because they were farmers, I got a little pompous. I practiced a couple of times, and then my wife Renuka and I drove to the event. The signs were not good. Both Renuka and I had spent a restless night, and we had a long drive ahead of us. She kept asking me if I'd done my usual practice runs, and I nodded, but I knew I'd taken some shortcuts. And on that day when I went on stage, I was sleep deprived and already a bit tired from the drive. Plus, as you can tell, I hadn't done my 15 or 16 practice runs. So when I got off that stage and I asked Renuka how I had done, she gave me a -2. This series is a little detour into the world of psychotactics. It's about the times when we got strange results, below par results. Some of these results were our fault, and some of them were just experiences we've had along the way. In every instance, we learned a lesson, and it helped us move ahead in our business. So let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? Let's look at some of the -2 experiences. And we'll go back all the way to 2003, where I was a speaker at this internet summit, this internet conference, and things went horribly wrong. Or at least that's the way I saw it at the time. I should have known better than heading to a particular internet marketing conference in Australia. It was what you'd call a pitch fest. Pitch fests are given that name because the speaker tends to speak for a limited amount of time, but then reserves at least a third of that given time to pitch, to sell their products or services. Think of speaker after speaker getting up on stage and selling like those folks you see on infomercials, and you get the idea. I was not even part of the original speaker setup, but I was keen to be part of an international speaker group. Even though it was barely 2003, the speakers at the event had substantial lists, some exceeding 50,000 subscribers. We, on the other hand, might have had fewer than 1,500 people on our list. I watched as speaker after speaker got on stage and made a presentation. Then they'd make an offer, and there would be a scramble to the rear of the room where they would be selling their products. It was pretty early in my career, but I was pretty confident of my speaking skill by then. I'd done a bit of selling from the podium as well, and I thought I'd be going home with several thousands of dollars in sales. This dream of mine seemed more feasible when I compared myself to the person who did the presentation just before mine. To me, his presentation was boring. It was just about how to run some software. It wasn't really a transfer of knowledge. And yet, when he made his pitch, there was an almighty scramble to the end of the room. I was sure I could top that act because my presentation was clearly better than his. And in my mind, I was a far superior speaker. But even as I was standing off stage, things went horribly wrong. I was allocated just 45 minutes, and that included my presentation and my pitch. I figured the person introducing me would be done in about 3 or 4 minutes, but like an MC that won't shut up, he went on and on for about 10 minutes, maybe even longer. Sure, he was saying good things about me, but I was losing a ton of time in what I considered to be a pointless introduction. Anyway, I got on stage, I did my presentation confidently, and I made my offer. It was the moment I had been waiting for. I had dreams of the audience stomping over each other to get to the back of the room and buy my products. You have a good idea of what happened next, right? Yeah, you're right. Nothing much happened at all. About 15 people gingerly got up from their seats and casually sauntered to the back of the room. But did they buy the product? In my head, I was still doing the calculations. Since we were selling the product for about $100, I'd still make $1,500 at the very least. However, maybe 9 of them decided to go ahead with their purchase. And you might think that's still pretty good for a 30 to 45 minute presentation, right? And yes, it was a good deal, but not when you consider the expenses. To be part of the event, I had to fund my own travel costs. There was the flight to Australia, which exceeded $500, the hotel room, which also exceeded $500. And then there was food, there was transport to and from the hotel, there were other incidental costs. Plus, the organizers wanted 50% of all the sales to be passed on to them as a commission. That was a -2 experience. I was out in the cold and not feeling very good about myself. However, any pity that I have for myself is quickly tempered by the fact that there is a learning experience in every failure. So was I happy about how things turned out? Of course not. But what I did was I resolutely sat at the back of the room. I watched what caused clients to scramble like crazy. That event wasn't my first lesson in scarcity, but it certainly was the first one that was filled with so much of a sense of defeat. It's that defeat that made me pay close attention to every single presenter. I stopped paying attention to the content of the presentation and instead paid attention to what they were doing on stage. And I learned some very valuable lessons that we use to this day. But one mystery remained. Remember that speaker who went on before me? He wasn't terribly good. His content was mostly technical. He made a pitch that involved scarcity just like everybody else. So why did he succeed when I did so miserably by comparison? I knew him quite well, so I went up and asked him what he thought was the big reason. Frankly, I couldn't see what caused the audience to rush to the back of the room. And that's when I learned about the concept of the bonus. Now, you're well aware of bonuses when you buy anything online. And I was aware of bonuses too. I had bonuses with my pitch, so why didn't the bonus work just as well? The key was the nature of the bonus. He was offering some software that would enhance their positions on Google rankings. Yes, those were the good old days when a lot of crazy stuff worked even on Google. But that wasn't what people were so excited about. He had promised that the first 50 people would not only get the software, but that he would install it. He would install it on their servers, so they had to do nothing but run the software. Aha! It wasn't the bonus. It was so much bigger and so much better than a mere bonus. And that's when I learned that you need to make the bonus more important than the product itself. You need to make it more important than the product or service itself. Why? Because when people decide to buy something, they've already made up their mind. If you've decided to buy a fancy new computer, you are already in the frame of mind to buy it. But what if someone offered you a bonus? A bonus like a box of chocolates. The box of chocolates costs just $15. The computer costs $3,000. But what are you focused on? What if I told you that you could get the computer and we were not going to give you the chocolate box anymore? That is the power of the bonus. Suddenly, you're focused on the box of chocolates. You're not focused on the computer. And that is the lesson that I learned from the -2 experience. I learned that the bonus and the type of bonus is very critical. So I lost on the monetary front on this trip, but when I got back to Auckland, I had a plan in place. What we did was we looked at the sales of the Brain Audit, we looked at the Brain Audit sales page, and then we made sure that we had an irresistible bonus in place. And the power of the bonus worked. As a result of that failure in Australia, we sold more product than ever before. That embarrassment led to a profound learning experience. And to this day, when creating a product or service, I think about the bonus. I think about the bonus long before I write the sales page for the product. The bonus, that's what matters more than anything else. And it doesn't even have to be many bonuses. Just one compelling bonus is what makes the client decide that they want your product or service right away. But this episode, this podcast, isn't about the good success stuff. These are stories about where we messed up. So it's time for story number 2, don't you think? And story number 2 takes us to the bottom of the North Island. So we live in New Zealand, 2 islands, North Island, South Island. Wellington is the capital of New Zealand and it's on the bottom of the North Island. And that's where I made this big mess. A mess where I created extreme personalization. And extreme personalization, that's not a good idea. I've gone blank on stage only thrice in my life. One was back in school when I was about 12 years old. The next time was when I made the presentation for the Brain Audit. But the third time was really odd. It wasn't at the start of my career. It was at a time when I was confident with my speaking. I was being paid to speak at events, at a series of events. When I first started out in marketing, I'd read and heard stories of personalization. One of these stories came from veteran marketer Dan Kennedy. Kennedy talked about how he showed up for a Mary Kay event. Mary Kay Inc. is a cosmetics giant and is famous for its bias to the color pink. Superstars, the salespeople who earn over $18,000 in a 4-month period and who are also building a team, are rewarded with a pink Cadillac. Dan Kennedy, ever the showman, turns up for the Mary Kay event in pink. Pink suit, pink tie, pink patent leather shoes. Kennedy said he wore pink in order to sell more effectively at Mary Kay events. And it clearly worked for him because he'd sell 40% more when he was dressed in pink. Now, at this event in Wellington, I wasn't selling anything, but I saw no harm in trying to personalize my presentation. Since I was working with brokers at an insurance company, I spent hours talking to my liaison at the head office, the broker's head office. And then I sought out and I found examples of insurance-based problems. I found insurance-based solutions. All of these were case studies. All of them were stories, my research towards personalization. And what I didn't realize was that I was making a big mistake. The first mistake was that it ramped up my nervousness quite a lot. When you're making a presentation, you're already on someone else's turf. I just made it a lot harder by over-tweaking my speech to include many insurance-based case studies. Trying to force their case studies into my presentation wasn't a mistake, but I didn't have any background of the case studies. No sooner did I bring up the case studies than I heard people in the room say, that didn't work, or they started raising objections to the case study. All of this pushback threw me off guard. Instead of doing the brain audit presentation, which was all my own, my entire talk was intertwined with their case studies. I was not prepared for this pushback from the audience, and yet the catcalls came at regular intervals. However, once you're nervous, things start to spiral. I was plainly confused and slightly terrified on that stage. Finally, I just gave up and I wrapped up as quickly as I could. What should have been an hour-long presentation was curtailed to a mere 30 minutes. Suddenly, the MC had a nasty problem of filling in half an hour of dead air as there was no presenter in sight. This was definitely a -2 moment. Renuka wasn't around to give me those low scores, and I had to self-evaluate my own performance. Why did things go so wrong? Was it Dan Kennedy's bad advice? Or was I at fault? What I had failed to notice, and I learned a lot later, was that presenters do tailor their presentations. Kennedy would have worn those crazy, even slightly ridiculous outfits, but his speech would have barely wavered at all. He might have had a few words here and there that talked about Mary Kay or that kind of business, but his presentation would have been scripted and nailed down. The Mary Kay women, they knew their business. Dan didn't have to tell them anything about their business. In my case, the insurance agents knew their business, and I clearly didn't. To give the audience examples that they could pull apart was a very silly move. They knew I was an outsider. They knew that I was trying to endear myself to them, and that was the worst move I could make. So what was the learning we got from this experience? Let's say we're selling a product like the Info Products course. That course is designed to show you not just how to create an information product, but to create one that is so useful that clients come back to buy many info products from you in the future. Now, let's say your current sales page is pretty generic, but then you're going to be introduced to 10,000 coaches. And now you don't want the page to be generic. You want to speak to the coaches, don't you? Think of the Dan Kennedy factor. He only wore pink. He didn't color his text in pink. If we were selling to an audience that was precisely coaching related, we could change the first paragraph. That first paragraph could talk about coaching and the biggest problem facing a coach today, and how the information products would be likely to help their coach. But that's where it would stop. Once we went past the problem, the solution would be as it is on the Psychotactics page right now. This brings up an ethical issue, doesn't it? If the product is not specifically created for coaches, would it be right to give them the idea that the product was designed just for them? The answer is simple. The product of the course would still have to deliver the goods. It would still need to help coaches, or anyone else create outstanding info products. However, there would be a greater attraction factor if the audience felt that it was aimed at them. At Psychotactics, we don't ever appeal to a specific audience, for instance, coaches. Instead, we use the concept of target profile, so the question of using this method would not arise on our sales pages. However, there may be several situations where you have to appeal to a specific audience. In such a scenario, you can make tiny changes at the top and don't go changing anything else. Start with the problem and what is the consequence of not dealing with that problem. And then when you get to your solution, which is presenting the info products course or presenting whatever you're selling, that is a generic thing. That would apply to everybody. So don't go around just changing stuff. Don't change everything. A little personalization, that's good. You don't want to go overboard. My stop at Wellington was pretty scary. I mentioned this in an article and a podcast before, how I was petrified of the place. I was petrified of the venue. I didn't want to go back there. But several years later, it's exactly where I had to speak once again. And this time it was a paid speaking engagement as well, so I couldn't back out of it. However, I stuck to my original speech. I got a rousing applause, and I didn't have to flee the auditorium in a hurry. I was able to turn that -2 experience in Wellington into a +6 or 7 the next time I spoke in Wellington. And I learned a very important lesson. I didn't need to over-personalize anything. I could make little tweaks and I would be fine. And this takes us to our third -2 experience. The third -2 experience was the mistake of tweaking the rules that we have at Psychotactics. We have rules because we've run into a problem before, and we have been keen not to repeat the mistake. Even so, it seems ridiculous to hold on to rules forever. You have to break rules, right? Sometimes we have to break our own rules. But retribution follows shortly. This is a story of a workshop where we broke our rules and things went south very quickly. In fact, there aren't one but 2 stories to follow. So let's find out more about the importance of keeping to your rules. I don't like the smell of the carpet. That's the ultimatum we got from a client's wife. You'd have quickly figured out that we're not dealing with a customer, but the wife instead. But what does the wife have to do with the event? And what was the carpet story all about? Rules are meant to be broken, but sometimes we have to bend over, and we bend over backwards too much, and then we pay the price. We've had many such instances where we have sought to break the rules, and trouble has hit us thick and fast. Here are just 2 instances where we allowed family members into the workshop. Back in the early days, we had a system called the Protégé system. These were a very small group of people, and from this group we created an even smaller group called the Inner Circle. We had just a few clients in the Inner Circle. The Inner Circle was so small that I thought no harm could come by including their wives or partners. Just as a matter of clarification, back then all our clients in the Inner Circle were male, which is why I mentioned wives or partners. Anyway, we're on with the story. And this is where our trouble began. We'd booked an intimate boardroom, seeing that we were so few of us. But as the wife of this participant walked in, she stormed right out. "I don't like the smell of the new carpet," she said. I'm not sure what the problem was or whether she was allergic to the smell of new carpet, but there we were to start our session, and we were in a fix. And she was demanding another room, and there was none to be had at the hotel. So she took her grievance to the reception and she started berating the staff. If there's one thing that I've learned in my life, it's this: when you want to get on a flight, you don't scream at the ground staff. And the same applies to a hotel. You don't scream at the people who are most likely to help you. She was yelling at the people who were most likely to give us a room or to help us out in some way. And as her screaming got louder, we were forced to step in and take over. We found out later that she had been inadvertently screaming at the general manager of the hotel as well. The GM was quite unassuming. You'd never expect that she was the general manager because she was low-key and she looked more like an employee. And this screaming was aimed at her as well until we decided to take matters in our own hands. With a lot of pleading and apologizing, we managed to get another room. This room was anything but cozy. It was super large. It was more like a disused meeting room. We were so few of us in the room, and it made the entire proceedings so very uncomfortable. However, our little nemesis didn't stop there. When I'd bring up a point in a presentation, she'd object. She hadn't read the brain audit, she hadn't gone through the notes, she hadn't gone through the whole process, and we thought it was a good idea to have partners and wives come along, but it was evident that she had no context. So she interrupted. She argued her way through the day. At most events and workshops, most clients hang around the meeting room. Unlike other events where people leave shortly after, you'll find that we, Renuka and I, stick around, and so do most of our clients. We may be around for at least an hour after the workshop is done. But in this case, when we were done, which was about 4:30, we were out of the room like a bolt of lightning. We made our way to our room just to recover. This is our own room. And then an hour later to the bar where we inhaled enormous amounts of gigantic margaritas. But did we learn our lesson? Apparently not. The lesson was not to allow anyone who wasn't part of the group, anyone who hadn't read the notes in advance, and we send the notes at least a month in advance, anyone who hasn't read the brain audit, they're not welcome to our events. But there was this pleading tone in the email that we got just the day before the event was about to commence. Apparently, our client was visiting California with his daughter, who was a teenager. He asked if we could accommodate her at the back of the room. She would be very quiet, he said. She would just sit there, she would not participate, she wouldn't do anything. That's what he said. Now, I don't know why I didn't see the signs. Think of yourself as a teenager. Would you sit through a workshop on website strategy for 3 whole days for no reason? It became evident that there was an ulterior motive, but we only realized it later when we were going through previous correspondence with this client. He had earlier asked us if we could book 2 seats at the event, but finally he booked just 1. We didn't think about it at the time. Clients ask all sorts of questions over email and we answer, and no one really dwells on such issues. But there we were at the workshop, and just as the workshop started, the chaos began as well. So this teenager, she didn't participate in the workshop discussions. But in a Psychotactics workshop, we have group activities which involve you leaving the room, going to the swimming pool, going for a walk. But these are activities. And that's where she started to tow along with her father, which seemed fine at first. Soon enough, other clients started complaining. She was butting in. She was getting into the discussions. She'd start going off at a tangent, and then her father would defend her. And we get very polite people at our workshop, and they put up with her for quite a while, but it was causing a lot of chaos. It was causing a lot of heartburn. They weren't getting their assignments done because of all these arguments. So I had to tell the client that his daughter couldn't be in the room or attend any of the sessions. And this got him really angry. He couldn't see why she wasn't able to attend. It didn't seem to occur to him that she wasn't part of the group or hadn't even paid for the seat. It was a very messy moment, and one that we could have easily avoided. It created a whole bunch of frustration that none of us needed. And while it wasn't exactly a -2 moment, it sure created a bleak, nasty situation. So what's the learning? The main learning is never to allow anyone who doesn't have the credentials. In the case of all workshops and courses, at least our workshops and courses, the credentials are the purchase of the brain audit. If the client hasn't read or listened to the brain audit, then they're not welcome. However, at a different level, we need to stop being overly kind and letting in anyone, wives, husbands, kids, or anyone who isn't required to be at that event. No matter how much pleading is done, the rule is now unshakable. And that's how our -2 learning has helped us in every instance. We've learned more from the bad times than from the good. That speaking engagement at the Farmers Conference taught me not to wing it, to be prepared, to be even over-prepared. The event in Australia seemed to be a fiasco, but it was valuable training. It was only once I started paying attention to what was happening around me that I learned the concept of the bonus and what specific bonus you have to put in place that creates this demand that causes customers to buy. The event in Wellington with the insurance agents, it taught me never to over-personalize anything. Over-personalization puts you squarely in the space where you're not the expert. You already have your speech ready, and it's best to do a sprinkling of personalization and then keep to the original script. Finally, it was and is important to have benchmarks. When it comes to attendees, whether it's events or courses, making an exception doesn't always lead to chaos, but why bother inviting confusion in the room? Our job is to ensure that our clients get the best experience, that they go home with a skill. They don't go home with additional confusion. By restricting who's in the room, we end up with a better result every single time. And then we can enjoy our margaritas. We don't have to guzzle them after an energy-draining day. But these -2 events are only part of the picture. At Psychotactics, we have ups and downs. And you've got a lot of the -2, which is the downs, and in the next episode, we'll go to the ups as well. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So what's happening in Psychotactics land? Back in 2006, 2007, and 2008, we had the Protégé program. And there were just 15 people a year that went through that program. So that's 45 people in all. And those 45 people paid their fees, which generated close to $500,000. So what did we do after those 3 years and $500,000? We stopped the Protégé program. And this is more to make space to do other things. Those other things are a book on talent. It's a book on teaching in forums, a book I call Teacher versus Preacher. There are all of these projects that I wanted to do, and they keep getting pushed aside because I get so involved in a course. There's also 5000 BC. There's a podcast. There's a lot of stuff, and all of that stuff, which seems to be not important, gets pushed away. And that's what I'm going to do in 2019. So we've got the article writing course that's coming up. And this is going to be the last article writing course that you can get onto until 2019. So the next article course is going to be in 2019. But this year, we're going to be selling out the seats on the 20th of May. The course starts on 31st of July and goes till the 20th of October. So it's the date that you have to look for is the 20th of May. Now, if you're a member of 5000 BC, you get advance notice, and that's what I would suggest you do because there are just 20 or 25 seats on this course. We always want to make sure that we give you the skills so that you can write your articles in 90 minutes by the end of this course. We don't just offer you information. You're going to learn about article writing, but what's the point? The point is that you want to write an article in 90 minutes or less. A really good article. An article that you think, wow, I wrote that. So that is the whole point of the exercise. And so we have to have just 20 or 25 people. If you have your date right, which is the 20th of May, then you can get on the article writing course. And it's not a cheap course either. It's a very intensive course. It's going to be in excess of $3,000. But it gives you a skill that you can use for the rest of your life and you never have to struggle again. We have a prospectus that details every single person that has been through this course, and you'll get that prospectus. But this is just an intimation that 20th of May is an important day. So that's it. Article Writing Course 2017. 20th of May is when we start selling the seats, and the course starts right at the end of July, which is 31st July. If, on the other hand, you want to learn to be a cartoonist and you think, I can't draw at all, well, that's the kind of person that joins the Da Vinci group. And this course goes on for at least 6 months. It starts out in June. It's a lot of fun. You learn to draw. And if you've seen some of the cartoons of the group, and they post it on Facebook and other places, you will see how much you could progress, how much joy you could get from being able to draw and not having to say, I can't draw a straight line. Because cartoonists don't draw straight lines. They draw curves and they draw fancy stuff. So you can start to draw stuff within a few months, and by the end of 6 months, you become very good at drawing cartoons. So that course starts out in August, but on the 10th of June, we'll be selling the seats for that. Once again, we have limited seats. When we say limited seats, it's going to be 30 or 35. That allows for a little more space than, say, the article writing course. So we have 35 people there, but that's it. We're not going to take more than that. And these are the two courses that we have on plan for Psychotactics this year in 2017. Now that doesn't mean that you can't be a member of 5000 BC. 5000 BC is very cool. You would want to join. People ask me, do I have to have a business? No, you don't have to have a business. But if you have a business, well, I'm a member of 5000 BC, and there are lots of people who are members of 5000 BC, and they all have a business. So whether you have a business or don't have a business, the point is not that. The point is that 5000 BC has a lot of information, but it gets you moving in the direction instead of just going after a new shiny object, in the direction that you want to end up. And that is what 5000 BC is all about. It's about being kind, being helpful, and helping yourself grow your own business. And that's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now, and look forward to the next episode where we talk about the good times at Psychotactics. Bye for now.